My name's David Estes. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Morpheus, and I'm going to give you kind of a technical demonstration of Morpheus. Some of you may have seen it before, but there's a lot of new stuff, so we'll kind of go into that a little bit. Just kind of give you an overview of what there is in the product. So I'm going to go ahead and dive over into that. All right. Oops, I'm in dark mode here. So we're going to change that. I know Steve doesn't like dark mode, so we're going to turn that off here to our regular, easier to see. But we do have dark mode. So that is a new thing we've added to the product, both from an accessibility perspective, as well as just different types of presentation modes. All right, so I'm going to start in provisioning. So Brad kind of talked about that self-service provisioning earlier. And one of the things we want to highlight here is there's a ton of stuff Morpheus can provision. It's not just infrastructure. It's not just VMs. It could be a bare metal workload too. It can be containers. It can be cloud native services. It can be databases. Really, sky's the limit in what you want to do. We also have XAS, which we'll talk about later as well. So this is a catalog. We've got a mix of things in here. We do provide a lot of defaults. So like I can just say, hey, I want an Ubuntu image. I can do that. Or I can say, oops, I want an Apache web server, right? Let's do a quick Apache web server. I can pick a group. We actually have this really cool model where you can actually organize your workloads into groups, not just applications, but groups. And the groups affect things like policy control. If you have different quota restrictions or naming policies or approval policies, as well as just a means of organization and our role-based access. I can choose where I want to provision this. This is one of the really cool things about Morpheus is we support more clouds than anyone else. And it doesn't even have to be a cloud, right? It could be a Kubernetes cluster or something of that sort. So I'm just going to pick AWS here for brevity in this sense. You'll see we have a naming policy in place here.
If you had selected a Kubernetes cluster as opposed to a virtual machine destination, how would that change how it deploys the instance?
So what it does is literally the way Morpheus works with its service catalog and its instance types, you define layouts. And you can say a layout is for a certain technology. So Apache could have a layout for VMware versus Amazon versus Docker/Kubernetes. What happens there is for the Apache example, you get a choice. Basically, when you pick that group in cloud, it actually looks for the available clusters you have built out in that cloud. Is it a Kubernetes cluster or is it just a plain Docker cluster? You have both those options. And then you get to, the screen adapts where you can pick a size, just like you do a t-shirt size here for Amazon. You can pick a size for your pod, essentially, for your Apache deployment. And you can also pick, in this case, it's a VPC, right, for AWS, but in the case for Kubernetes, it's a namespace. And there's group access control and all that stuff to where you can restrict which namespace you can deploy to. The other cool part on the Kubernetes side, and I probably should just pull it up, is the persistent storage changes too. I can actually, choose how much persistent storage I want. I also get to pick my storage classes that I have configured in my Kubernetes cluster. Not just ones that Morpheus deploys like via Rook, but anything that's discovered in that environment. So if you're using a third-party persistent storage environment in Kubernetes, it's automatically synced back to Morpheus and you can select that. I'm just going to deploy this really, really quick here, kind of show you how easy that is. You get the advanced options. You can close these. There's just a ton of different things here, but decided to open everything. It's running a little slow on the Wi-Fi today, but I think we're okay. Another thing that Morpheus is also able to do is do code deployment. So in the case of Docker Kubernetes, you don't really do this very often. You normally have it prepackaged in a container and with a version. You can totally do that model too. Or you can literally just say, hey, I want to deploy an artifact as well into that environment. Hit complete. And off it goes, right? You're going to get an estimated time to provision. You're going to actually see the health, the last time it was backed up, see how all these integrations kind of tie together in that workflow to where you get a nice view of your service and how it's behaving both based on a deployment perspective and a day two operations perspective. We'll see this fill out here in a minute. That's just a single stateful pod deployment type of thing, right? It's just a single application. Really, though, what Morpheus really does really well is it actually glues that all together for more complicated applications, right? Where you can do application blueprints via apps. Actually, you do that under library. This was actually a recent change. We moved this all into libraries. So you have nice area to kind of build all this stuff out. You got your tasks and workflows where you can build out your provisioning phase-based workflows as well as your operationals, as well as you have this blueprint section. This is where you build out like that Apache instance type and layout. And then you can actually build more complicated blueprints, both visually or programmatically. And blueprints are pretty cool. We have, just the standard basic Morpheus type. And that's really for those, kind of classic type of applications. You can do Docker as well. I've done several microservices this way. If you really want to, we also do offer the option to leverage other technologies. So if you've got a existing Terraform application you want to deploy, you want Morpheus to maintain that for you, go for it. You say Terraform. What's cool about this is we have really tight integration with Git and other source control management services. So either you can say, hey, I want to run a TF file and paste it in right here, or you can actually reference a Git repository right here, pick it, and it will actually automatically make sure it has the latest version of that whenever you're deploying that Terraform application. So you're not restricted just to our templates, right? If you've got Terraform, if you got Helm charts, if you've got CloudFormation or ARM, you have that ability as well. So I think we have a good example of a tier application here. Let me pull that up quick.
You said Terraform, Kubernetes, Helm, and you could also pull from repositories. Is that for each one of those? So like if you make a change to a Helm chart, it pulls the change,
yes.
pushes the change, and then modifies it. Same for Kubernetes. Same for okay, cool, thanks.
Yep. There's more to that too. We actually kind of put that throughout the application. So if you're building like even just operational tasks or workflows and you've got some scripts you want to run as part of that, instead of sending that or pushing that specific content into the application, you just reference the file in the Git repository, and every time it runs, it makes sure it has that latest version of that. And you can tie that to a branch or a tag as well.
So how are you distinguishing between operational tasks and like something like unit testing? I mean, it almost sounds like you're saying that you're creating your own CI/CD pipeline. Is that am I overestimating that, or is it?
Normally we're tied into the CI/CD pipeline, not necessarily a full CI/CD pipeline. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just you said a lot of patterns that sounded very similar to something that you could actually use GitLab for or something. So
yeah, there are some close correlations, and I think that's actually a lot of people really like that about that because they're already used to that Git flow and the Git operations, right? So by being able to reference those in your IT operations and stuff like that, it's a lot cleaner.
I know you're talking about Terraform and things like that, but when I started looking at this, and again, when I have to go deep down it, just from a question perspective, do you support Packers?
Yeah, there's actually support coming for Packer here in the future. I don't have a date, so don't quote me on that for sure. There is image builder technology that actually behaves similar to Packer in the product as well under the tools section. That kind of gets into our hypervisor console support and stuff like that, where we can boot a box from an ISO, automatically type a few keyboard keys into it, and then orchestrate the rest of the installation by providing links to like the unattended and things like that. So deploying an application is pretty easy though. I can just go, hey, I want to go provisioning apps. I'm going to deploy a simple two-tiered application. All right. So I might scroll to it faster. It comes up. There we go. It's just a simple app, and I could just give it a name, David's demo, EFD 14, choose a group, put in the demo group, put in AWS, next. Assuming I picked the right cloud. This will automatically load that blueprint, give you kind of a representation. You actually can get a preview of how things connect. One cool thing about this model is you can actually define dependency or boot order and things like that as well. And the internet's just running really slow, so I'm going to skip that for now. And next, get a nice review and complete. And the same goes for other types of applications, be it CloudFormation, ARM, Terraform, Helm, those kinds of things. That's how you kind of build those multi-tier applications, right? And you get a similar view with these as well. You can drill into them. I think we have a few examples here. You can just kind of see this one's empty, so I have one up in this environment. Okay, you've got a demo. This is actually a high availability deployment of Morpheus by Morpheus. and you can kind of see the application structure is referenced in here and things like that. So that's instances and apps. Last year, we also recently added the service catalog. This is more of that traditional view where you want to do just basic ordering. You don't want all the complicated options. You want to limit specifically to just a few fields for the user input, and you want it to automatically do the rest for you, right? So we introduced this a couple of years ago now, I think. And what this allows you to do is you can just say, hey, I want this Apache example. You can order it, and you can see it's real simple. Pick your size. You want to tag it, yes or no? I think, yep. So you can see how you can do conditional form building as well. So you can completely customize how that form builds. We also have pluggability for this, where you can actually completely design the catalog item detail screen from down to the HTML if you want to. So you have that level of granularity. If you want just the basic order form, there you go. If you want more complicated, you don't have to. You just hit order now, and that's going to go off and do its thing. So that'll take a second to populate, I think. Here. Yep, there it goes. And that can normally map to like those application blueprints you saw, an instance or an operational workflow.
I was going to jump in. So from a use case perspective, one of the, we've talked a lot about developer enablement, but we have a lot of companies where the end user requesting these could be, we have a lot of universities where it's a grad student on a weekend doing a project on behalf of a professor. We've got a lot of healthcare, tightly regulated industries where it's somebody in pharma running a test against, a new medicine that they're running. So that self-service view is really one that we developed to expose kind of that simple view to some of those non-traditional users who may not want all the bells and whistles.
Yeah, and based on the question earlier, you asked how it looked in Kubernetes. This is actually that exact same Apache app I just deployed, and it's in a Kubernetes cluster on that vCenter. So that was all masked behind the scenes for you. You can kind of see how that can blend that self-service with Kubernetes as well. Back to that traditional IT style. I should also mention, you're seeing this all in a standard persona. We do have persona. So for those more less tech savvy users who need just that simple ordering screen or whatever it might be, we can actually present this in a service catalog persona view. You can see the navigation changes. They don't see all that other stuff you saw me log into earlier. You get that dashboard, that catalog, and that inventory. So that's what we call those personas there.
This automation, obviously, that based on the role you see certain, I'm expecting it to have certain catalogs available to certain groups of people, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
So is there also an approval process built into this?
Yes. So the way that works is we have a policy engine. You can go to administration policies here. And you can actually build out sets of policies. And policies range in type. They can be like quota policies, like you want to limit the RAM or the storage or the cores or the total count in general. Or they can be naming policies, or we talk about approvals, and they can be approvals for delete, provision, reconfigure. You can actually set a provision approval or delete approval. And what's cool about this is it's got basic internal approvals, not super complicated. Someone who has the role-based access to go into the approval screen and approve things can do it from there. It also has the ability to integrate with third-party ITSM tools such as Remedy, Cherwell, and ServiceNow. So I could pick a ServiceNow integration, for example, and link this to a ServiceNow workflow. And I'll actually go into ServiceNow, create the RITM request item if you're familiar with that, and automatically monitor that for when it completes its approval workflow. And when it's phased as accepted, Morpheus will kick off the job, or declined, and it will represent that back to the user with the reason.
Dave, I promise this will be the last question, I promise. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about, how this is used from a provisioning perspective. And again, if you're going to get to it, we can. If we need to table it, we can do that as well. But one of the challenges is source of truth, right? Mm-hmm. Do you guys view yourself as the source of truth from a provisioning perspective from the intent perspective, or is that like you rely on something else potentially to become that?
Great question. And it's a complicated answer, but really what it comes down to is it depends on your environment and what you're trying to do with Morpheus. Morpheus can be your source of truth for sure. We have some customers who use Morpheus to self-service Terraform, and their state files are their source of truth. We do inventory and track those state files. So in essence, we're wrapping the source of truth there, right?
Yep.
Then you've got situations where you've got a mix. You've got IT directly in vCenter doing things, and you've got customers provisioning into the Morpheus portal. And that ties into our discovery piece where we actually will monitor the cloud behind the scenes and make adjustments back to the source of truth, check for drips, that kind of thing. So for example, if you provision a size small in Amazon, a T2 small, and someone goes and resizes it in AWS console to a large, we will detect that, adjust your costing, and represent that correctly in the UI for all the clouds we have.
That's good. So again, I could go down this path for an hour, but do you have any reference material on that? Because I'd be interested in kind of, kind of looking into that, because that's, like you said, that's one of the challenges that everybody needs to solve, right? So it
Yeah,
sounds like you guys are thinking about it even from a Terraform perspective.
Yes.
So-
We even have Terraform drift checking where we automatically will go through your Terraform application deployments periodically and check for drift and represent that drift for you directly in the application detail screen as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of user guides built out on the docs.morpheusdata.com that goes into that. I'm happy to set up a double click. I think back to my it depends, answer to Ned. I think source of truth can vary by who's asking. And I think one of the patterns, and he touched on it briefly in approvals, is ServiceNow, right? It's a classic ITIL ITSM gets that source of truth moniker, right? We've seen the pattern and usage of ServiceNow integrated with Morpheus shift a lot, particularly with some of our bigger customers over the last 4 or 5 years, right? Early days, they wanted all provisioning actions to come in through a ServiceNow front door, go through a complex approval process, and then they'd give it to you on the other side. And obviously, a lot of development teams said, "Well, that sucked, right? Why did I have to do that?" So we've seen that pattern shift for a lot of those power users, where now they are using Morpheus natively or via API embedded into their pipelines. But on the back end, we're pushing CI record updates and making sure that source of truth, right, from an ITSM perspective, is still care and fed. So the ServiceNow team is happy. They don't get all up in arms, but you don't have to make some of those more high velocity agile teams sit through that workflow.
No, good. Thanks so much for that. Because everybody has their own interpretation, but very well articulated there. So look forward to some more on that.
Yeah, related to that, you talked about personas, and I guess a two-part question. I'm kind of curious as to what all personas can change in the GUI, and adjacent to that is, could that source of truth conversation depend on what persona? That makes sense?
I think so. I don't want persona, sort of. Yeah, I think. So the personas right now, I think we offer 3 main personas. We offer the standard, the service catalog, and the virtual desktop. We are planning to add pluggability to that, being able to add your own personas. And that actually ties into a future roadmap item with dynamic dashboards, being able to customize your dashboards and widgets and all that. That's actually coming within this year. We're kind of talking futures a little bit here, but you'll start seeing that. As far as, does that impact your source of truth? Not really. I mean, all those personas tie to the same data set. So you can kind of view it in whatever way you want to view it. Yeah. Okay.
And we use persona kind of in a couple different ways. There's tightly bound, there's actually a construct, in the code for a persona, right? Your GUI interpretation of reality. Right. Even outside of that, every single feature function is granularly scoped with RBAC. So if you wanted your developer user to see provisioning and a catalog with one item in it that he can provision on Tuesdays, you can lock it down, using RBAC. And again, so
right.
Persona could be more loosely interpreted as what a user sees. So it can be kind of hard modeled in the construct of what the GUI is, but also RBAC is a way to give your business analyst access to the analytics and reporting, section of the UI. Your developer view, he doesn't get to add infrastructure or muck around in vCenter, right? So we use that more loosely with RBAC.
That's all something that can be implemented today.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's baked. That's been baked in from day zero, even down to white labeling.
Oh yeah,
all of that.
I kind of pulled this up here just to a little bit of the RBAC and policy stuff. This is kind of the boring part of the screen, but every feature you've been seeing me demo, I have granular control when I build roles, and the user can be combined into multiple roles. They build on each other, and you can map those to your identity source provider. So if you're using SAML, Okta, JumpCloud, Azure SSO, any of those types of things, you can actually map these different permissions based on full, read, user, none, those types of policies. Not just on features, you also can do group access. We talked about that demo group for organizing your workloads. The available instance types are allowed to provision, blueprints, you can customize a report type access. Which reports are they allowed to preview and run? and also personas. Which personas do they have access to? What's their default persona? So if you have a user you want to restrict strictly to the service catalog persona and they don't want to have access to anything else, you can just set that to full, turn everything else off. When they log in, they just get that one persona and they don't see anything else. Same with virtual desktop and catalog item types as well. So this also can be applied at the tenant level. So you can have a set of roles that apply to the tenant, and then they have their own users inside their own identity sources, and they can create all their own roles they want to create as long as those roles do not supersede their tenant role. So as a service provider, you can decide what Morpheus services you want to provide to them, and the sky's the limit for them within the bounds you've set for them. Just talking about that tenancy model, it is fully customizable, white label, all that type of stuff. You can actually go in here and I'll just impersonate this user in this tenant. You can see you can customize that white label at the tenant level or globally. And this tenant is completely, they've got a completely different instance list. They've actually got a different catalog, more, reigned NC is just this subset. They've got policies scoped just to them, be it limits or whatnot. So you have a lot of granular control. You can even share clouds to them or cloud resources. So if you've got like a master vCenter, you want to share out a specific cluster or resource pool from that vCenter just to a certain tenant, you have full control to do that. Or if you've got a Kubernetes cluster and you want to share out just certain namespaces to them, you also have the capability to do that as well. Adding clouds to Morpheus is very simple. I do want to kind of highlight that. Like we talked about, it takes an hour to get going. But within an hour, you can pretty much have self-service in your environment. You install Morpheus, you can install it on all-in-one, and you just go and add your cloud to get started. So you can say, hey, I want to add my cloud integration. And you can pick, say, VMware. Hit next. Just give it the credentials you need. A new thing we added this year, you don't actually have to type the credentials here anymore. You can now reference credentials or create reusable credentials. Those also can be stored externally in a HashiCorp vault if you would like, or a CyberArk or Thycotic or things like that via our plugin integration. Once that's added, Morpheus automatically starts inventorying and doing discovery on that cloud. So you can see all the available data stores. You can actually see the discovered VMs and convert them to managed. So we don't just do greenfield, we do that brownfield as well. We help you pull that in. Looks like this is, I picked the wrong cluster here. I picked another one. There it is. We moved data centers recently. So, all right, so you kind of get that summary, and we'll get into this in another conversation with regards to costing, but you also can see all that discovered stuff. You've got your discovered networks, data stores, resources, things like that. And you also have granular permission control on these, which group is allowed to use it, which service plans are accessible, which tenant, all that type of capability is available in the product. And on that self-service, there's one other thing we haven't talked about. There are several ways to consume Morpheus. We've just shown mostly the visual way, the UI way to consume it. There's also an API, a very detailed API. There's a CLI right here where I can just type, like, so you can see I can do an instances list here. There's 974 auto-completable commands. So everything you've seen me do in the UI is accessible in that API. So if you're looking to tie this into a CI/CD pipeline, you have all the capabilities you would have there. There's also a Terraform provider for Morpheus where you can actually write Terraform directly to Morpheus to deploy your applications.
Is the GUI based on the APIs? Is it
Yes.
fully consuming the APIs and nothing?
No, because the APIs are a little different. The UI has additional things in it for visual representation that you wouldn't necessarily need in the API side. So they are kept separate.
Okay. Is that another API that could be consumed?
You could, in theory, consume it, yeah. But they're off different. The UI APIs are off based on a UI session where the OAuth APIs are kept separate.
Gotcha.
We also have to do that because we have some customers who don't want to expose an API. So everything's in /API, right? And they actually will block that off. So they just have the visual consumption. And if we made our UI use the /API, we run into issues with it, not routing and things like that. So
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
yeah. So that's actually one of the reasons we keep that separate. They do all tie into the same standard business logic services though.
Are you all seeing a lot of customers or any customers at all where they might be looking for self-service patching, for example, coming into your platform?
Patch management comes up in some RFPs and RFIs, and then
Yeah. It's coming more into play the further along our our product basically evolves in that automation area.
Yeah.
State tracking, we do some security scanning, we support SCAP scanning, for example, stuff like that.
Okay.
So that does come into play a little bit in those conversations.
I think as a just kind of product ethos, right? We span so broad, right? There's always a risk of just trying to be everything to all people. So we really want to maintain our core, and where the pluggability has come in and the ability to do things like those automation workflows and tie into your, your Ansible, your Chef, your Salt, your other automation tools is if you have a best in class tool you've already picked around a certain domain, great. We want to give you a framework to either push the agent you need for it, run a call to go execute a command. We want to be a framework that gives you a place to pull that in to deliver the outcome, which is back to self-service provisioning of application workloads and managing those day two, and then giving you the metering and the cost data around it. Everything else is kind of an adjacency. And while we do have a whole lot of native services, we're not trying to be all things to all people at all times.
And that makes sense, because I mean, even thinking about it from an Ansible Tower controller perspective, I mean, obviously you're going to have customers that have that, but I think that this fulfills that portion as well, even more so.
And we have seen that way, and I hit on it pretty quick in my skimmed overview, right? Reducing tools sprawl. There are a lot of tools out there that have a massive amount of functionality, and customers use 30% of it day in and day out, and they're paying $1 million a year for it. So if we cover that 30% functionality, or up to even more than that, I'm doing it a disservice. But there are a lot of people who have said, hey, I was using a Cloud Health or insert tool here. What you guys have in that space is more than good enough, and I can reduce that and do it all in one place without the added overhead. And particularly, and again, in service providers where tool equals margin, we want to be able to do that. But if you do need to go beyond our depth, we also want to give you a good hook to tie into that, so it's not another management silo.
Like network provisioning. Do you all get into like physical layer, like network provisioning, storage, things like that, or are you staying up in the stack after hypervisor and things like that?
If we go back to our
origin story a little bit here.
A little bit, or if we go back to going around the horn, we are going to talk about kind of automating other things. But yeah.
Okay, we can wait.
Yeah. But well, just saying, since we started at that application layer, we kind of moved two directions. We moved into the day two from that. We expanded outward from there, and then we also expanded the other way towards infrastructure as kind of our product lifecycle grew. In the past few years, for example, we have really deep NSXT and NSXV integrations, ACI integrations, where you can create everything from the gateways, the load balancers, the segments, complete control over that. The OpenStack Neutron APIs are all there. So we actually go really deep on the networking side. That also includes the cloud native network layers as well.
Okay.